Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that is being set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Functional Forum. This is James here. Very excited to be with you here this evening and to be starting a new year. If last year was the year of resilience, this year is the year of reinvention of medicine. And so we're super excited to be bringing you some interviews and some content as we kick off the year of reinvention. Got a lot of interesting things to share, particularly shout out if you're watching this from one of the meetup groups across the world. We're excited about what's going to happen with meetups in 2020-21 as we reinvent medicine. You can go to meetup.functionalforum.com. Make sure to stay in touch over the year because we're going to be announcing a number of new meetups across the world, and we have some exciting updates coming in that way. So tonight is Reinventing Medicine 101, and we're calling it the guts. It's the guts of the reinvention. You know, we're going to listen to Patrick Hanaway as he shares some of his thoughts on what the guts of the reinvention looks like. We're going to hear from Dr. Vincent Pedre, who's going to talk about gut health and why gut health is important. And we're going to go through some super specific content on how to avoid patients who cycle back between different kinds of issues. Gut infection, SIBO, dysbiosis, some great clinical content in the middle. And then Dr. Miles Bodzin is the founder of cashpractice.com. We're going to talk about adherence and some of his thoughts on patient retention, which is another big part of this reinvention. Before we get into all of that, it's a pretty exciting day over here, and I'm pretty excited to share that about a year ago, this book came out, The Community Cure, Transforming Health Outcomes Together. And actually, as of this week, a review of this book came out in none other than the Family Medicine Journal, the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine. Look, if you write a book that's for doctors and health practitioners, like I did with the Community Cure, you're definitely not writing it for Pulitzers or for, you know, New York Times bestseller status. You write the book because you think it could have an impact. And so I just want to read you this quote, which is, you know, this is an amazing moment. And I'm super blessed to have participated. It says, Maskell's push and timing could not be better as Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education plans to overhaul family medicine residency guidelines in the near future. And leading family medicine organizations are collaborating strongly to steer that change. Importantly, bold questions are being asked about what competencies we should be committed to teach in family medicine residencies, and topics such as lifestyle medicine, virtual medicine, genomics, population health are being elevated for consideration. The vision is not what's just needed in the next few years, but 30 to 40 years. With these pending changes in mind, Maskell seems to be achieving progressively firmer footing in increasingly turbulent times and deserves our attention. So I want to thank the Society of Family Medicine teachers for that book review. You can read the whole thing. We'll be sending it out this week on the email. But yeah, thanks for being here and being part of the community. You know, obviously this is almost 7 years. The next Functional Forum will be in 7 years' time. Next month. That'll be the 7th anniversary of the Functional Forum. We started in New York. Now I'm just in this shed in my garden because we're in lockdown. But I got myself a new shed. This is now my office. So this is where I'm going to come to you live from now on. So where do we want to start? So Dr. Patrick Hanaway is an incredible physician. I have so much respect for him. He was one of the leaders of the Cleveland Clinic Project for Center for Functional Medicine. He was the chief medical officer of Genova Diagnostics for a long time, well revered both in functional medicine and integrated medicine, and also has a lot of experience with indigenous medicine. And so I wanted to have Patrick kick us off for the Year of Reinvention. So here's my interview with Patrick. So a warm welcome back to the show, Dr. Patrick Hanaway. Welcome, Doc.
Welcome. Thanks so much.
We are shifting here. This is the beginning of the Year of Reinvention here at the Evolution of Medicine. We just came from the Year of Resilience. It was very prescient to advocate for resilience even before COVID showed up on American shores, potentially, I guess. I'm hoping that, in this transition, we can really get ahead of what's going to be required in 2021. So what are your thoughts on the year that's gone by and 2021 as the Year of Reinvention?
Well, James, thanks for including me in the new year and thinking about this. We've seen this past year be one where resilience has been needed, and you picked it spot on. And because what we've wanted to do is be able to deal with, the stress of life, all the things that are coming at us, and be able to, effectively, we've heard many times, how do we make our immune system resilient, so that we can deal with what's out there. And while it is relevant to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it's relevant to life itself. How do we make ourselves resilient so that we can optimize our health and well-being as we go forward? And, as you know, I've had some opportunities to learn about that over the past few years, and, being able to focus on what is it that's going to help me to heal, to become more whole, and how do I do that amongst all the different kinds of things that are out there, and being able to listen. And in that way, now we're taking that resilience, and we're working to reinvent. You said coming into this year, but that is really about invention is like coming upon. It's finding. It's from that Latin word around invent, to encounter, to come upon, to find, and it's about finding again. It's like we've had this spark. We've known that it's there, and so it's like remembering, refinding, re-encountering that which is health and wholeness.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, it does seem, obviously, throughout last year, you were in a position talking about some of the resources that arrive in the natural world and resources that are used in functional medicine clinics to be able to create a more resilient body and to have an effective response to COVID. It does seem that the longer that time goes on, that so many of the principles that we've spoken about in functional medicine for years start to ring true. And one of them just most recently, for me, became most obvious was dysbiosis and how the gut is, when the gut is dysfunctioning, the effect of SARS-CoV-2 can be much greater. Now, in the concepts of reinvention, we live in a world where we have these like fully integrated systems of medicine, like Chinese medicine and others, where healing the gut is primary. And it does seem that perhaps there's some, if we're going to re-find and re-encounter principles, that there may be some good places to start.
We are coming to we take a food first approach, and that food first approach is one that, in order for that to be effective, your gut has to be in balance. You have to be able to assimilate and digest these nutrients so that you can have the macronutrients and micronutrients that you need to be healthy and well. And so when that point of balance and connection, remember our gut and the food we eat, it's our interface with the environment. It's the closest, most intimate relationship that we have in terms of determining who we are and who we can be. And so when things aren't working in our gut, we have imbalances, we have constipation, diarrhea, we have different symptoms that are going on. A lot of times, as you said, mediated by an imbalance in the gut microbiome. And we see this loss of diversity in the environment, and we see this loss of diversity in the microbiome. microbiome, and it's not able to function in an optimal way. So how do we bring that back into balance? And as you said, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, others all focus on this as a first principle of what we need to do. And we do see, a subset of patients who get exposed to, SARS-CoV-2, they have gut problems first and foremost. And some of my, long hauler patients, post-COVID patients have ongoing gut related symptoms, that are occurring. And so how do we bring balance back to that system in order to be able to promote resilience? And it's through that resilience that we have the opportunity to, find again, to reinvent ourselves.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I thought you'd be a perfect person to kick off this conversation of reinvention is because you do have, sort of, I guess, so many different areas of interest. I know for years the gut microbiome was front and central to your work at Genova Diagnostics. Obviously, being at the Cleveland Clinic and pioneering some of these group-delivered models and functional medicine inside systems. And then I know that there's a deep passion and deep experience for you in indigenous medicine as well. And so, there are three sort of incredible points of alignment, I guess. And how do you see those points of alignment coming through into this year of reinvention next year?
Well, I appreciate that, James. And what's interesting to me is like they're really all part of the same thing, right? And so when we talk about, connecting to self, each other as community and the natural world, like that's what we're working to do, is to find, well, where's the balance point? And that's what health is about, being, as I said earlier, becoming more whole. That's what we're striving for. So how we do that in relationship to each other in the natural world, critically important points, so we can learn from the wisdom of elders, who have gone before, who have had difficult times, have dealt with infectious disease, and have been able to bring, themselves and their communities and their cultures forward in a way where they're continuing to learn. I just read a piece by Ed Young in the Atlantic about science, and it's like, will science actually learn from what's gone through this year? They've done some amazing things, but there's some things that didn't go so well. Can we continue to learn? And the beauty to me of science is about curiosity, is about not presuming to know the answer, but continuing to look with curiosity. My experience of the indigenous teachings and elders is that they are continuing to be curious, and they're listening to what works in the world. They're not about ideology, they're about what works. How do we go forward, in this process? So, as I look to reinventing, what's happening, it's really about listening and being curious and saying, oh, that's not working, and this seems to be working. I don't understand this, but I need to learn it more. I need to deepen into it. And that will allow me to be able to, continue to grow and learn.
From that widest possible angle, where do you see are the areas where practitioners in our community and other people that are interested in this reinvention of medicine, where are the areas where they should be most curious?
Well, not to give props to you, but I think that you've hit upon it in terms of looking at community and looking at how do we do this in groups, and how do we work in relationship to each other, and how do we begin promoting the ideas of behavior change. We have some ideas of what are the best foods to eat? What are the ways to be able to sleep? How to gather information about sleep and heart rate variability? It's about applying them. It's about using that coaching model to be able to apply them and to be kind and compassionate to ourselves and each other, because we're humans and we're going to fail. We're going to, fall off the wagon, and we're going to get back on. And how do we have friendships and community that hold us, not only to support us along the way, but that can see us in the best vision possible of what we have to give to the world. And I think that what you've been talking about for the past couple of years, frankly, James, has been spot on in that regard. And we tend to want to go back to, well, let me focus on the science and let me focus on what's the vitamin D dose, or, teach me about how N-acetylcysteine works. And those things are great and important, but it's through community and through the group kind of processes that you've been promoting that I think the greatest way is to be able to truly reinvent medicine.
While we're still on the conversation of COVID, is there any difference between the structures, practices, and best laid plans for having resilience in the face of SARS-CoV-2 and helping people who have ongoing symptoms after COVID-2? Are they the same? Like, are we talking about the same principles, or is there some things that are specific to long COVID that practitioners need to know about, given that they're probably going to end up in the functional medicine doctors' offices around the country at one point or another?
Yeah, and I'm seeing more and more people, reaching out to me, asking for help in that domain. Certainly, the issues of, kind of what has been called in the past a myalgic encephalitis and chronic fatigue syndrome and post-viral fatigue, that's been described at least since 1985. And just saw a commentary from Dr. Fauci saying, like, yeah, he's seen these things with many different kinds of infections all the time, but it's really hard to get a handle on. Like, what was the trigger that caused it for an individual? Was it Epstein-Barr? Was it some stress? Was it some accident? Was it some other phenomena? Was it an autoimmune disease process? He said it's very different now because we have a single source trigger where everyone is now developing symptoms from that. So what is the cause of it? We don't know yet. When we look at groups like Mount Sinai in New York, who set up a clinic in May around this, but they're looking at it from a siloed perspective. They're looking at the neurological and the psychiatric and the vascular and the pulmonary and the GI and the cardiac effects of what's going on, and dermatologic and everything else. When I look at it from a functional medicine standpoint of those functions, and I say, seems to me like energy production is underneath this, and there's a relationship between the mitochondria and energy production and the immune system and how they're working together. So what is the trigger there? How do we support the mitochondria? How do we deal with the immune dysfunction that's going on and be able to support that so that we can deal with the oxidants that are slowing down, or as I talk to patients, I say rusting the mechanism of energy production. It's a little factoid, but I love it. It makes so much sense to me. It's that if we have 6 minutes worth of oxygen to produce energy at any given time, we have that's how much ATP we have in reserve is 6 minutes until we need more oxygen to be able to do max. That means that our body is refilling its tank of energy 240 times a day. Now, if you have just a little bit of inefficiency in that process, it's going to affect things. And where's it going to affect first? First, it's going to affect the brain, because that uses the most energy. Then it's going to affect the muscles and the heart. Now, we see people who are having fatigue and can't move and are short of breath and had difficulty climbing stairs and having cognitive impairment and psychiatric issues going on. To me, it's like, okay, so the mitochondria is really essential here. And what do we need to do to be able to bring that back into balance? Now, where the big question is in all of the post-COVID investigation at this point in time is, what's driving that? Is it an immune activation that's continuing to cause imbalance and upregulation of inflammatory components? That's not really clear. It is clear that there's immune dysfunction, and it is clear that there is mitochondrial inefficiency that's going on. So those are the two primary foci from a functional medicine perspective to how do we support people in this way. And we're still learning about what are the best tools, but using things like a glutathione and N-acetylcysteine that are going to act as antioxidants, using higher doses of some of these kinds of things that I've talked about for immune resilience are important. And then we'll be investigating, the proponents of other agents are saying, oh, these are things that are going to be effective. We don't have the data on that yet. And so we're going to continue to move forward with a systems biology approach of how the pieces fit together and support patients in that way. And you said something earlier, and I'll just, and I've got a couple patients who have come to me who started having symptoms in, late December and early January. People who were, traveling internationally or in major places like New York City or Disney World, where there were lots of different travelers, and while when I first saw them, I said, no, this doesn't fit the timeline. What we now know is that, oh, it was probably in this country. I think we can say safely it was in this country, sometime in November and December, because we see people have antibodies to it at that point in time already. So it's a bigger issue than we can imagine. And to just put a point on it, one of the reasons why I'm supportive of the vaccine, the mRNA vaccine at this point in time for most people, is that because, and there's a lot that we don't know in terms, to me, the patients I've seen with long haulers or post-COVID, which seem to comprise about 20% of all patients who get COVID, it's like, that's a huge number. And so in my patients, I'm saying I want to weigh the effect of the vaccine and dealing with potential side effects of that versus the side effects of getting the wild type SARS-CoV-2 virus infection and the sequelae that I've seen from they're significant. They're not minor, they're significant.
I think if more than anything, I feel like all the things that we've been hearing about in the functional medicine community for the last few decades should give us all firm footing. We have the firmest footing in medicine for what's needed to take us where we want to go. And I think, sometimes it can feel like things were moving underneath us, even early on in COVID, where talking about the things that we knew boosted immune resilience or created immune resilience, we're being sort of shut down. And now here we are 9 months later, and we see that, okay, the world is coming round to the fact. And so just for all of us to feel a confidence in the sureness of our footing. And I really just want to acknowledge, yourself and all the other leaders that have been sort of, I think giving everyone in our community this sureness of footing. And ultimately, I'm very excited about this year of reinvention. I see great things being possible for our community and our integration into the community at large. And thank you for your time here today and for setting up such an incredible starting point for this year of reinvention.
Well, thank you so much, James. And I think that you've highlighted, that there is a lot of fear in the world, and COVID has unmasked the fear. Some people might even call it the virus of fear. But that what is necessary for us to do is that fear actually is the opportunity to be able to express courage. Courage arises in the setting of fear. It doesn't arise outside of that. So how do we have the courage to hold to this vision, that we see, and there's not arrogance or hubris in it. It's just that, like, this makes sense and it works. And so let's be courageous in holding to this vision to reinvent ourselves as we move through 2021 to be of benefit to our people.
All right, I love a lot of what Dr. Hanaway shared there. I hope you did as well. I think there was so much good stuff, to talk, and just what he said there at the end. Courage is what comes from fear. And I think that we're going to have to be courageous if we want to reinvent medicine. And I think there's a lot coming from what you just said there to show that we're on the right track. We're doing functional medicine. We're thinking about groups, and I think that that's an exciting starting point for what's to come next. So feel free to send, questions. I'll be on Twitter here live if you have questions coming up in the next little moment. Let's get to some great clinical content here. Really excited to talk a little bit more about the gut. And actually at the A4M conference, which is back in December, I heard Dr. Vincent Pedre give a great talk. One of the things that, with gut health that comes up is that a lot of patients come in and they've been on like antimicrobial pharmaceuticals. And then we have to try and work out like how to get them better. And then is it, pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals and diet? How do we use all those kind of things? And I just felt like he gave a really clear presentation as to, how to work with those things. So I want to share this presentation, and he came in and did a special interview which shared some of the same ideas from there. So let's check in with Dr. Vincent Pedre talking about gut. So a warm welcome back to the show, Dr. Vincent Pedre. Welcome, Doc.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great, Doc. Really so excited to have you to kick off the year of reinvention. Obviously, we believe that gut health is going to be crucial to the reinvention of medicine, and to talk really about the reinvention of gut health. Really excited to have you on. When you think about reinvention, what does it speak to you?
I think it's really kind of, first of all, a complete paradigm shift. And that is what needs to happen. And that paradigm shift needs to flow out of the functional medicine world into the Western medicine world. And there has to be more crosstalk, working together for a common goal. And the thing is that we're using science in different ways, but the science is there. It's just a matter of where you put your attention to.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I know last month you gave a super compelling presentation on a sort of a new area of understanding gut dysbiosis. And so I'd love for you to, share some of that with our community.
We talked about rethinking SIBO in the microbiome era and really kind of redefining what SIBO is, but also how can SIBO be treated? Because if you're a practitioner and you've tried treating SIBO, what we do know is SIBO is one of the most challenging conditions to treat in terms of gut health. And that SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. The low FODMAP diet can help, but people don't want to be on a low FODMAP diet for the rest of their lives. You can give them rifaximin, which is an antibiotic, and it has a really great eradication rate. But the problem is that it's short-lived, and then you have a high relapse rate. So when I was working with SIBO patients, I was always looking for what is the bridge? How can we get them from treatment to back to normal, and recognizing that after treatment, they're not at normal again. So there has to be some sort of bridge to get them through that. And as part of this, we're rethinking the way that we diagnose SIBO. So traditionally we've used breath tests, and there's controversy about the breath test. And there's now the tri-breath test that looks at hydrogen methane and hydrogen sulfide. And the early breath tests were only looking at hydrogen and methane. So maybe missing some of the SIBO cases that were hydrogen sulfide based. And the thing is, a large proportion of patients with IBS actually have SIBO. They've calculated around 60% of IBS patients are actually harboring SIBO. And a lot of this IBS happens after infection with bacteria, producing something called CDTs, cytolethal distending toxins, like E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, Campylobacter. And why are they significant? Because CDTs disrupt the cytoskeletal tissues. So they're damaging the intestinal epithelial cells, they're increasing intestinal permeability, and then they put you at risk for a whole host of other problems, including autoimmunity and food sensitivities. So they looked at the role of bacterial cytotoxins and cytoskeletal proteins in patients with IBS and SIBO. And what they're looking at is there another way are there other biomarkers that we could look at that could define SIBO other than a breath test that has its pros and cons? It's not completely accurate. And these include things like IgA, IgMs, and IgG antibodies to these bacterial cytotoxins and cytoskeletal proteins that can be detected in the blood with high accuracy and reproducibility. And that is about a sensitivity of around 92%. And let me explain a little bit, what is this cytolethal distending toxin? So these bacteria like E. coli that produce the CDT release the cytolethal distending toxin. It gets absorbed by the intestinal epithelial cells, and then it forms a vesicle. And in that vesicle, then it releases subunits. So there's subunit A, C, and B. Now, subunits A and C get separated, and this B subunit is the one that remains and can cause DNA damage as well as cytoskeletal protein damage that leads to increase in intestinal permeability. And then once you have an increase in intestinal permeability, you can see here, then you can have food antigens coming through. And that's I think the frustrating thing with SIBO being treated from the Western medicine point of view, where it's just give an antibiotic, rifaximin, and pray for the best. And if they recur, you treat them again. But each time you're causing a progressive dysbiosis. I've seen patients who have taken rifaximin who also develop small intestinal fungal overgrowth. So they get candida or some other yeast overgrowth. So this is the pathway that leads to more and more disease. So you have a SIBO patient that's not just a SIBO patient. They're presenting with food sensitivities. They're presenting with inflammation. Their immune system is getting activated. So it's much more complex than the original definition that is just saying there's overgrowth of bacteria in the small bowel. And this is basically a chart showing the reactivity of controls versus IBS patients in terms of these different antibodies. And you can see particularly IgAs, which are secretory antibodies, are quite high for these cytotoxins and cytoskeletal proteins. So I want to shift a little bit now. So we're thinking about these toxins that are being secreted by these intestinal bacteria that could play a significant role in SIBO. So what about serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins? Now, we know that they can bind things like LPS. And could they bind other pathogen-associated molecular patterns, as we call them, that stimulate inflammatory cascades inside cells and activate immune cells and cause inflammation? Well, we know that SBIs, short for serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins, can bind things like lipopolysaccharide, C. diff, toxin A and B. We're not exactly sure. We kind of suppose, but we need more research to understand if they can bind these cytolethal distending toxins. But they seem to play an important role when I was looking for ways to bridge people. So I was talking about that bridge. You treat the bacterial overgrowth, but now how do you heal the gut? How do you bridge them back to normal? And one of the things I started finding is that using serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins was a great bridge. And why that versus colostrum is because you don't have to worry about dairy sensitivity when you're using an SBI. And the thing is, they can remove these PAMPs from interacting with the pathogen associated receptors, and they also prevent then immune activation. And by doing that, they prevent the inflammatory cascade. And by preventing the inflammatory cascade, then they can allow the intestinal lining to start to heal and the tight junctions to start to repair. So they dampen this molecular mimicry that can happen that causes all sorts of immune problems. So then we've got the SBIs dealing with these toxins, but how do we repopulate the gut? And the frustration I always met when dealing with patients who presented with SIBO or combination, sometimes I call it SIMO, small intestinal microbial overgrowth, which I think is a much better way to look at it because it could be broader than just bacterial overgrowth. But what probiotic can you introduce immediately after treatment without aggravating symptoms? And I found that regular probiotics with lactobacillus and bifido were making patients sick again. They were getting bloated, they were getting uncomfortable. So I started experimenting with spore-based probiotics. And spores are these dormant soil-based organisms that can form a spore to protect themselves from stress. And then when given the right condition, they can germinate again. And these spores have been found in fossils, and they can actually reactivate even after years of being in this dormant spore state. So they're very fastidious, and the cool thing about them is that they can really help restore the terrain, and they do a bunch of things, including helping balance the pH inside the gut. They produce short chain fatty acids, they produce vitamin K, biotin, and most importantly, they do something called quorum sensing. So they can compete against other bacteria for space in the gut. And they were actually used, these spore-based probiotics were actually used as antimicrobials, quote unquote, to treat gastrointestinal issues before the advent of the penicillins. So in this study, they looked at the relationship of using a Bacillus coagulans, a spore-based probiotic, plus a low FODMAP diet in comparison to just the low FODMAP diet by itself. And the low FODMAP diet across the board did help improve many GI symptoms like abdominal pain, bowel satisfaction, quality of life, frequency of bowel movements. But when you added the Bacillus coagulans, they had a much better improvement in their severity scores than placebo. So it was 57% versus 35% with a p-value that was significant. And that's what I was finding in my practice in treating patients with SIBO or SIMO, that these spore-based probiotics seem to play the perfect role in creating that bridge to get the person back to normal. So if you put them together, you have these bacillus spores, which through quorum sensing, they outcompete other bacterial species. They help regulate the pH in the gut, and they produce these antibacterial compounds that kill off other bacteria. So just in case the treatment wasn't complete, because I think it's still controversial to, whether treating SIBO for 2 weeks versus 4 weeks versus 6 weeks. I've seen a lot of different ways that SIBO is treated by different practitioners. And then combining it with serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins, because they can bind things like these endotoxin, LPS, the gram-negative bacterial PAMPs, and maybe also this cytolethal distending toxin to protect the gut lining and buying it time to be able to heal. So this solution is kind of like what we call a dual push-pull action. So with the bacillus strains, you're pushing out non-resident species, and they have this intelligent networking that produces compounds that inhibit the growth of other bacteria. And then you bring in the SBIs, the serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins, and you pull out any toxins that could hinder the healing process, because really what you have to heal. So I guess the bigger picture here is that SIBO is not just bacterial overgrowth. SIBO is also another pathway to increase intestinal permeability and damage to the epithelial lining of the intestine. So you have to heal the epithelial lining if you want to heal the person completely and not have them cycle in and out of SIBO treatments, which is what I've seen with patients who are in the Western model. And frustratingly, this can happen with patients with SIBO. So this is a sample treatment protocol. There's many ways, and obviously treatment should be individualized. So you always have to be treating the person in front of you and not use a protocol and apply it to every single patient. But say that you're seeing a patient that was given antibiotic, maybe was given rifaximin or maybe some antimicrobial herbs, digestive enzymes for digestive support, and a prokinetic agent, because there always seems to be some sort of dyskinesis that accompanies SIBO. And then once you go through that part of the treatment, then in weeks 3 or 5 through weeks 12, so about a period of 3 months, you put them on a spore-based probiotic combined with serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins. You can continue other things like digestive enzymes, prokinetic agents. Again, remember, a lot of these patients have food reactions. A lot of times I find that SIBO patients suffer from hypochlorhydria, so they have low stomach acid and they need to be given betaine HCl in order to be able to digest their protein better and improve their digestion overall. And then maybe after week 12, you can start to test and see if you can move them on to a different type of probiotic. And all along, you're implementing lifestyle measures to improve whatever was the reason that the person developed SIBO in the first place, because there's many different paths to SIBO, and one of them is an acute stressful event in life that just causes the digestive tract to get stunned, slow down, and then next thing you know, the person has SIBO, maybe eating a lot of the wrong foods. So this is a kind of a big shift in understanding SIBO beyond just bacterial overgrowth, and seeing that it's a much bigger issue than that. And maybe the cytolethal distending toxins play a key role in the development of SIBO or SIFO or SIMO, whichever way you want to call it.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I think there's so much good stuff in there. I love quorum sensing, and I feel like that level of intelligent networking is what's happening at the Functional Forum meetup groups as practitioners get together and work that out. And I think that obviously resetting that function is huge. You know, one of the things that's come up for me, obviously, you know, we've always said, you know, health begins in the gut. But if we look back at 2020, I've been seeing, and I'm sure as someone who's deep in this all day, you've been seeing that, you know, gut dysbiosis and gut dysfunction has a big role in our susceptibility to something like COVID.
Absolutely. And there's been different studies, different reports that even from Korea saying that kimchi intake helped reduce the risk of getting worst version of COVID, to studies now that just came out, and I was reviewing from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center on patients who are undergoing bone marrow transplant. Out of all patients, they were studying their poop. Now imagine that, like they're studying their poop. Now they put these patients under like some pretty intensive antibiotics. And what they found is that the patients that had the higher survival rates had a more diverse gut microbiome. And that could redefine the entire way that they're practicing these bone marrow transplants, because diversity in the gut also prevented something called graft versus host disease, which can happen in patients who have a bone marrow transplant. And I've been saying this from the beginning of the pandemic, that the gut is the gateway to your immune system. So if you want to have strong immunity, you need to have a healthy gut. It's foundational. And I think the more and more the research is going to show how important it is to start with the foundation of the gut and then build the house of your health on that foundation. The same way you just wouldn't build a house without a foundation, you can't build the house of your health without the foundation of gut health.
Absolutely. So, Doc, one last question. You know, it's 2021 and Dr. Vivek Murthy is watching this and he sees this and he's like, wow, we've been doing it all wrong. We need to get Dr. Pedre in to, you know, to talk about policy and creating a healthy America in 2021 and the next decade. You know, what are you telling him about not just like what needs to happen, but what you've learned from your own clinic about how that could happen in sort of like a population-wide level?
I think there's so many things that we could be doing to even just change what we call iatrogenic complications. So doctor-induced complications from, you know, the most widely prescribed subset of medications, antibiotics, for example. And there was a couple of years ago, I went to the Microbiome Congress, and there was a company in Europe that was researching a delayed release, basically binder, a charcoal product. And what they found, they were doing it for preventing C. diff. And what they found was that if you could put somebody on a delayed release charcoal, so in the small intestine, it doesn't release until it gets into the large intestine. Turned out that the worst effects of antibiotics were happening in the large intestine, which we all know is the biggest reservoir of the microbiome. And if we could just institute, you know, like as part of the standard operating procedure, even patients, by the way, that were getting intravenous antibiotics will suffer from a gut dysbiosis because that antibiotic, like ceftriaxone, for example, gets processed through the liver, secreted in the bile, and then kills off the bacteria in the large intestine. So, and what they found is even in those cases, they were preventing C. diff using this delayed release charcoal product. So a binder. And imagine how inexpensive that is. So I think we need to change the way we practice medicine at a foundational level and realize, you know, when you're putting a patient on an antibiotic, you're causing another problem. And if you're not going to address that problem, then you're not being a good doctor. You know, because you're the one causing the problem. The issue has been is that there's been a lack of awareness for so many years. So if we could only change that paradigm, the most surprising thing in the last couple of years that I saw was a patient of mine who was in Switzerland, was given an antibiotic for a urinary tract infection, and then was given a probiotic that was by prescription to counter the effects of the antibiotic to take after she was done with the antibiotic. And I thought, wow, like, why aren't we doing that here in the US?
Yeah.
That should be part of our standard uh, practice of medicine. If you cause a problem, then make sure you're also giving the antidote to that problem. And I think that's what needs to change, because we're causing a lot of morbidity and mortality, you know, a lot of disease from antibiotic use that leads to dysbiosis, that leads to leaky gut, that leads to then all sorts of food reactions, and then autoimmune disease, which is rampant in our country, and then now becoming rampant worldwide.
It reminds me of the one law that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and ultimately all of these interventions that we're doing to try and help, you know, are certainly not always doing that. And antibiotics is a great way. And what a great way to, you know, to kick off this year and the considerations about the reinvention of medicine. Doc, thanks so much for leading the charge. I know that many clinicians in our world look to you for really understanding what's going on in the gut. And I think today's presentation, you know, really gave everyone a great starting point to understanding this. It is ubiquitous, you know, across the population. So many people struggling with something on that, you know, on sort of like that line or that
Spectrum.
Yeah. Exactly. And if we can deal with it a lot better, I think we can turn the health of the country around. So check out Dr. Vincent Pedre. Doc, thanks so much for being part of the Functional Forum, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right, so Dr. Vincent Pedre, he was sharing with us some of his strategies there. I think there's some great clinical pearls in there, whatever kind of patients you're dealing with. I'm sure everyone's dealing with gut issues in their practice. So for our last interview here, for the first session of Reinventing Medicine, you know, we've looked at a sort of a high level with Dr. Hanaway. We've got into the weeds, into the quorum sensing, into the gut with Dr. Pedre. You know, we've always had some practice management related content here at the Evolution of Medicine. And recently I've had a chance to connect with a guy called Dr. Miles Bodzin, who's the founder of a business called Cash Practice. And super interesting guy. We had a conversation where he talked about payments, and particularly about the things, he said the 4 F's. And the 4 F's are the things that really helped his patient retention. And ultimately, you know, I know one of the things that we're going to have to look at as we reinvent medicine is the payments. I'm pretty excited actually about some of the changes that are happening in insurance billing, which is going to make it easier for functional medicine to be practiced on insurance. And that's continually something that I'm interested in. If you are interested in that, love to hear from you, because we've got some interesting pilots going on right now in clinics across the country in functional medicine insurance billing. But Dr. Bodzin shared some great info on patient retention and billing. And so for our final speaker here on the first forum of the new year, check out Dr. Miles Bodzin for his Functional Forum debut. So a warm welcome to the show, Dr. Miles Bodzin. Welcome, Doc.
Thanks. It's great to be here, James. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So the theme of our year this year is reinvention. And I have a feeling you're a guy that's reinvented yourself and has, you know, played a part in trying to reinvent medicine. And why don't we just start there? What does the theme of reinvention mean to you?
Well, thanks for asking that. You're reinventing ourselves. And I can think of some key times in my life where I have, and we all have these key moments in our life that we remember. James, I bet you remember exactly where you were when 9/11 happened. And I can remember exactly where I was when it happened. I also remember exactly where I was when O.J. Simpson's announcement was he's not guilty. Like, we have these moments in time where we remember things. And I can tell you a story real quick of another time I remember where this is really when the reinvention kind of, I guess, the fruits of that reinvention happened. And that is, it was a Monday morning. I was driving into the office, my chiropractic office, and I was on the way in. And I was going over the summit. We, you know, from our home, we'd go over this mountain and drive down to this community where my practice is. And I could imagine going over the summit and you see this beautiful sunrise and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I've been working my ass off. I've been working so hard and I just need a break. I literally need a vacation. And the time at this point in my life is I couldn't get away. I was at my practice. I just couldn't get away, but I needed a vacation. And the reason I remember this moment so clearly is because when I got into the office, it was the look on my receptionist's face, Holly. And the look on her face was after I said this. I said, Holly, I need a break. Any new patient that calls, send them somewhere else. I can't see any new people now for the next few months. Like, I just need a break in practice because taking care of new people was a lot of work. Yeah. And what gave me the freedom to do that was merely the fact that I had a practice full of people that were regularly coming in. I didn't need new people, in essence, for the business to operate, for the practice to operate. And the reason it has such an impact is because when I often tell that story, especially in front of a live audience, the looks on everybody's face is like, what do you mean no new patients? Like, we live for new patients. We're constantly marketing to get new patients. And so when we talk about like reinvention, this is what I had to do to get to that place. I remember there was a point in my life where in practice, I was struggling. I got out of school. And this was in the early 90s. And when I got out of school, I wanted to run this wellness type practice. And picture this. I'm sure you can relate to this, docs. You're in practice, you want to take care of people, but 9 out of 10 people who walk in the door are part of a managed care program or an HMO that you're not part of. That was my practice, that all these people that were coming in were not thinking of me for wellness. They were thinking of me for back pain and neck pain. And they wanted to use their managed care, which I wasn't part of. And I hit a brick wall. In fact, the brick wall was so hard that I hit that I literally couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't afford life. I ended up with my wife and child at the time, moving back in with my family, my parents, because literally couldn't afford to live. And eventually I got some advice. And some of the things that were given to me were not great, but some of the things were. And it allowed me to transform what I was doing. And that reinvention eventually led to a place where I had extraordinary success in practice, where it led to that moment where I was able to tell Holly, no new patients for a while. I just need to take a break and a breather in practice. And, so that was, that reinvention of, I can't tell you how important that is from the standpoint of like, if you're running into a brick wall or, you're bouncing into a glass ceiling, or you're like a fly looking through a window who's just kind of get outside and keeps bouncing into the window and you're just hitting your head over and over and over, you got to reinvent. You got to look and pivot is a great way of putting it. You got to look to doing something different.
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. In the last decade, you've built this organization, Cash Practice, and one of the things that I've learned, about it in the recent is that it's not just for cash paid patients. There's a lot of practices that take insurance and use it too. But give us sort of an overview on what it does and why so many practitioners use it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for asking that. So cash practice, yes, the name implies cash-based practices, but in fact, it's not. You could be insurance and utilizing insurance and utilize it as well. So don't let the name fool you. When people ask me that question, what is cash practice all about? Really, what it's all about is we're a platform for helping doctors increase their patient retention. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when we're seeing patients on an ongoing treatment plan, whether you're doing chiropractic, you're doing functional medicine, whatever you're doing with a patient, and the intention is to see them for a period of time, that means you have to retain them. And I know that one of the biggest challenges doctors reveal to me is their frustration with patients dropping out, of not following through. And I'll always ask this question, like, what is one of the biggest reasons patients don't get the best clinical results with us? Like, they should get certain clinical results and they don't. The answer often is they don't get the results is because you didn't do something wrong. It's because the patient failed to follow through. Like, they didn't do what you asked them to do, or they just got lazy, or whatever the reason is, they just didn't follow through. And that was a frustration for me personally in practice, that I was like pouring my heart and soul into taking care of these people. And sometimes they wouldn't follow through. And it dawned on me, like, if I want to get the best clinical results with people, then I got to figure out what I need to do to get them to stick to the plan, to follow through, to be retained. And once I did that, man, did that revolutionize my practice, not just from the standpoint of clinical results and the outcomes and the satisfaction of helping people, but also monetarily, it made a big difference, obviously, as well, because the practice grows as a result of that. And the money is just a reflection of the fact that I'm creating this great value for people and people are following through. So what cash practice is all about is it's all about the notion of building patient retention. And when it comes to patient retention, if you want me to dig into this next thing, I'll be happy to. There's really 4 key components to patient retention.
Okay.
And so let's talk about those for a second. First, let me dispel a myth. One of the myths we've been taught as healthcare practitioners is if patients knew what I knew, they would do what I do. Like the myth is that if they just understood the benefits of my care and understood how to work, et cetera, they would follow me. And in chiropractic, we have this thing that says if patients, knew what I knew, they would do what I do. And from the standpoint of if they understood the benefits of chiropractic, et cetera, they would follow through with what we do. And we have this extraordinary amount of effort being put into educating our following, our patients. And there's importance to that. And that is one of the components. But the challenge is we as practitioners think that's the only component. What does doctor mean? Be teacher, right? And so we teach, but that's not what it takes to retain people. It's just one of 4 components. And so an easy way to remember these, I'll illustrate them. We refer to them as the 4 Fs. So F number 1 is frequent contact. And that's what education is. That's what we're talking about right now, where you're educating people. It's one of the 4, but it's only 25% of it. And this is one of the reasons doctors struggle is because they put all this energy into that and they don't put any energy on the other 3. The second F that's important, that's easy to remember, is feedback. Patients need feedback. In fact, we all need feedback.
Yeah.
It's part and parcel to people progressing through a program is them getting feedback. And that's a critical component. In fact, if you ask a patient who comes to you who was seeing a previous doctor, maybe, and you ask them, why are you coming to me now? And why are you not going back to the prior doctor? Oftentimes you'll hear them saying things that indicate that they didn't know how they were doing over there, which means the previous doctor did a terrible job of giving the patient feedback. And so doctors, you have to ask yourself on a scale of 0 to 10, how good are you giving your patients feedback? A 0 would be you're not giving them any feedback. A 5 would be, well, I'm reporting back to the patient how they're doing, but I have to spend a lot of time explaining it and teaching them, et cetera. And they don't really understand it, but I have to, put energy into it. And a 10 would be you give them some type of report that you don't have to say a word about. Like they just look at it and they know. That would be a 10 on feedback. Yeah. Going back to frequent contact, ask yourself again on a scale of 0 to 10, how are you doing? A 0 is, you're not doing any kind of contact with people. A 5 would be, you send them cards in the mail, maybe a newsletter, that type of thing. A 10 would be, when they come into your practice, they have TVs all over the place, educating them on your services. There's posters, there's weekly topics, there's emails going out on regular, maybe there's text messages going out, but you're in regular contact with your patients. That would be a 10.
Yeah.
The third component of that, or the third F of the 3F is frictionless payments. Frictionless payments. What we find in practices is that, and this was a big deal in my practice, that when I said I went from struggle to success, is making it where it's really easy for patients to pay you. In essence, you want to automate things. You want to make it so that money is never a subject. That in essence, their card is on file, their credit card, their bank account, and either on individual services or on a recurring basis, their payments are automatically being processed. Chasing money later, you're not sending invoices, you're not doing anything that creates friction in the payment process. So we want to have a frictionless payment system. And then the fourth component, which is probably the foundation of all of this, because if you don't do this, the rest don't matter. And that is you must forecast care. The fourth S is forecast care. So what does that mean? So James, this would be me telling you, James, you need 6 months of care. You need a year of care. You need 2 months of care, whatever it is. And I'm telling you up front what the plan is, but I'm not just telling it to you, you're committing to it. Yeah. And if I go back to the story of me struggling in practice and having to move home with my parents and eventually figuring things out, what turned the corner from me not being able to live to having great success in practice are 2 of those 4 things. Initially, it was getting really good at forecasting care and recommending my treatment plan to people and getting them to say yes to it. And number 2 was having a frictionless payment program where it was a monthly type auto debit. Those 2 things in combination really turned the corner. I was already doing frequent contact. I was already doing the education. Yeah. I was already doing feedback in some form. Not great, but I was doing some. But doing those 2 things it was part and parcel to having this great success and the transformation in practice.
That's really cool. So look, I know that a lot of practitioners are kind of, struggle with these things. And years ago, we did a whole 15-part webinar on the future of patient compliance and really thinking about, reimagining it towards adherence and really thinking about, where it comes from patients. And a lot of the things you're saying there sort of match up with that. I know that you make it really easy for people to deliver education, and you have a partnership with our show sponsor, which is the Lifestyle Matrix Resource Center, which is education for doctors and helping them educate. So how does that work, and what would be a really easy way for people who are watching this to start to implement that?
So the LMRC program, we connect with them in two specific ways. One way we have these four systems, or these 4 F's that I just mentioned, and we have 4 systems in Cash Practice that help you accomplish those goals. And the way the connection happens is one of those is for our feedback. So I mentioned the 4 F's, one of them is feedback. And in order to have feedback, we use what's called the wellness score. That's our product, the wellness score. And what the wellness score is a report card for patients' health. Now you say, why a report card? Well, I was saying earlier that on a scale of 0 to 10, a 10 in feedback would be you give someone a report, or a report basically that they understand without you saying a word. And I think we can all agree that if you gave patient a report that said your health is a D, they'd get it. If you gave them a report that said your health is an A, they'd get it. Like, they know what letter grades are already. I don't have to teach them what that means. Yeah. So that's what the wellness score does. And what happens with the LMRC program is, specifically the CM Vitals program right now, is you go into the wellness score and there's a predetermined list of lab findings and exam findings that you put the results of in that software, and it produces this report card. So you're able to say to a patient, hey, James, based on your evaluation and everything we've done, we've determined that your health is a D+. And James goes, holy crap, that's terrible. What do I have to do to be an A? James, I'm glad you asked. Here's the treatment plan. Here's what we need to do to get you to an A. And then over the course of care, we're able to report back to you, hey, James, great news. Your D+ is now a C-. You're making progress. You're doing great. You're not an A yet, but we're making progress. A couple months later, hey, James, you went from a D to a C. Now you're at a B. Awesome. You're doing all the things you need to be doing. And as you're shaking your head yes there, that's how patients respond. They're like, good. I'm getting good.
They feel it too. It's not, they're feeling different. They're feeling the difference, themselves. The symptoms are going away. I think that's really important to have that kind of like integrated experience where people are seeing what they're seeing on paper and what they're feeling and experiences, and then they know when they're at A, and then they understand what it takes to stay at A, right?
Absolutely. And during the course of care, of course, you're educating them so they understand the benefits of the care you're providing. And they're also being educated on what's necessary in order to keep them at that A. The other thing that's really powerful is that we all know that oftentimes most of the symptoms, or a good portion of the symptoms, are alleviated early on in care, maybe halfway through the treatment plan. And yet they're still required to have some services or the treatment plan is not complete. And I know one of the challenges a lot of doctors reveal is well, patients are feeling better, so they lose motivation and they start losing, they're not following through as well towards that, halfway through the care per se. So again, if someone's at a C at that point, and yes, they're feeling better, you are able to communicate to them, listen, I know you're feeling better and you're making great progress symptomatically, but we also know that your hormones aren't still fully in balance, or whatever it is you're working towards, and you're able to demonstrate to them there's still progress to be made. So it's been an extraordinarily effective tool. And this is exactly why we partnered up, is because they saw that as well. And they wanted their doctors to be able to utilize that to have better success in the programs that they're teaching the doctors to do.
Great. Well, look, here at the Evolution of Medicine, we're always looking for great technology that can make it easier for people to reinvent medicine in their local community and to, practice successfully. If doctors are interested, where's the best place to go and find out and take a test drive?
So what they could do is go to cashpractice.com/CM Vitals. If they're part of the CM Vitals program, I would encourage them to do that. Otherwise, just go to cashpractice.com. And what we typically do is, you can learn about it, of course, on the website. But what we find for most offices is they like to just get a demonstration of the software. So what we recommend you do is, when you visit the site, is at the top of the page, you'll see a button that says book a call. That's simply a place for you to see a calendar, and you just pick a time that you would like to speak with a cash practice expert. And what they'll do is they'll go through, they won't initially do a demonstration. What they'll do is they'll talk with you, find out where your challenges are, where you need help, whether you're a pharmacist, whether you're MD, whether you're a DC, whatever type of practice you have, find out specifically your needs in your practice, and then they'll custom tailor the demonstration to you.
Well, Doc, thanks so much for being part of the show, and thanks for your efforts to reinvent medicine. I know you got on this theme a couple decades ago, and it feels like the timing is right now here in 2021 to really create a more significant transformation. So thank you for being part of the show today, and check out cashpractice.com, and thanks very much. So lots of great stuff in there. Thanks, Dr. Miles Bodzin, for being on. Just one thing I want to pull out of that, which is, you know, in pharmaceutical medicine, it's pretty clear when the thing is working because the symptoms that you're taking the pill for go away, right? If we're trying to actually facilitate healing, one of the things that we need is a scorecard. And one of the reasons why I wanted to interview Dr. Bodzin is because of the scorecard that he just communicated. So if you don't have a way that people can actually understand, a congruent experience to understand, are they getting better, and seeing it with their labs, the way they're feeling, and some other scoring, I think that that could make a big difference in retention and getting the best results, and then keeping people well, facilitating self-efficacy. All right, so this has been the first session of Reinventing. It's been the guts, right? With Dr. Hanaway, we talked at high level what it's going to take to transform this and reinvent medicine. Dr. Pedre, you know, really getting people well who have these complex gut issues, and then the guts of the payment system, and really thinking about really tracking patients as they go through their journey to health. I hope you've got something from it. We'll be back next month with our 7-year anniversary episode. Really excited to welcome you back to that next month. If you were paying close attention, you would have seen that, during the month of December, I did have a mustache, but that's gone, so don't worry about that. Won't be coming back anytime soon. But hope your 2021 has kicked off well. I think it's going to be a great year for our community. I'm really excited to guide you through it. Please feel free to get in touch with us if you have ways